Hello and welcome to Shape the System, where we find and tell the stories that help people to rethink the way the world works. We interview people from all over the world who are helping to change our systems for the better. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures, who help ambitious founders and their teams scale up for success. More about KPMG High Growth Ventures after the interview. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hey everyone, welcome to Shape the System. Absolutely stoked today. We're going to be talking to Andrew Walker from AirSeed Technologies. We're going to talk everything. We're talking about drones and plants and reforestation and biodiversity and a whole bunch of things that I actually don't fully understand. So let's just jump straight in. Andrew, thank you for joining us and just put us in the zone here.
Yeah, good to be here. So yeah, AirSeed Technologies is an environmental restoration company, and we combine some really funky drone technology with some very innovative biotechnology to help increase the throughput of revegetating at scale.
Okay, cool. And so let's jump into a few of these things. Reforestation, and I mean, we're now at the time of this recording, it's like early November, kind of a full-on week actually, but let's not even talk about that at all. But more recently, there's been an interesting David Attenborough that's come out that's talking quite a lot about biodiversity. And I feel like a lot of the language that we think about in a very simplistic terms is, hey, we need to plant more trees. But this is a gross oversimplification of the challenge and obviously the solutions and the context. So can we just talk a little bit more about reforestation and biodiversity and some of these factors that we've got to consider?
Definitely, and brilliant question to start with, because it's one thing that we throw down people's throats quite heavily.
Right.
You know, you've seen it in the media over the course of the last sort of 2-3 years. There's been a big push for, you know, let's go and start planting trees to mitigate climate change, let's sequester carbon, blah, blah, blah. Which is, you know, is a very valid point. If you look back over the last 30 years, you know, we knew climate change was here 30 years ago, but in this small amount of time, we've in this last 30 years, we've actually emitted more carbon than we ever had done before, even though we knew climate change was an issue.
Right.
So whilst going out there and planting more trees is a good thing, we have to be very mindful of what we're planting and where we're planting it, hence biodiversity. So we can't just simply go out there and plant monocultures for sequestering carbon, because we're going to create a larger problem further down the line.
So what's a monoculture? Just hold up for a sec. What's a, like, give me a definition.
A monoculture is basically a single species plantation.
Right.
So it's going out there and just planting, let's say, lots of eucalyptus trees here in Australia.
Right.
You know,
or in California, by the way.
Or in California. And
there's a lot of eucalyptus trees there for some reason.
Yeah, and we really need to be understanding ecosystems before we go out there and start just planting any species. So for many, many reasons. First of all, obviously, you want to be planting things that are beneficial to the local wildlife. So you want to be planting, primary habitat providers that might have been lost through such events like wildfires and so forth. You want to be planting a balance of grasses and bushlands, and knowing what used to exist in an area. If it was bushland, not necessarily going in there and planting trees. You want to be re-establishing what was previous there if we can.
Interesting.
But also being extremely mindful of the fact that we are in a point in time where we are still very slow behind the 8 ball in picking up climate change and recognizing what we need to do to mitigate it.
Sure.
So whatever we do, we are still going to experience temperature increases, and we are doing now. We need to be mindful of what we're planting so that the species we do plant are going to be able to survive in this environment in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years' time.
Interesting.
So there's so many balls to juggle and so many points to take into consideration. It's not just going out there and just planting any tree for the sake of it.
Right. And so, there's a few things I want to break down here. So the first one is, I've had probably three layers of gross oversimplification so far on the call, which we'll try to unpack. The first is this idea of just trees generally. Now, monoculture and the trees in the local environment, one thing, but you've just made a point about the grasses and the bushlands and whatever was kind of native to that habitat or that area. Like, let's talk a little bit about that firstly. Like what happens there? You go into an area and say, well, there wasn't trees here and there hasn't been trees here in any recent history. The right thing to put here is a certain plant. And then how does how does the grassland versus the trees versus the tundra or the other types of kind of flora, how do they play out with regards to their impact on either both the biodiversity and the intended aim of, trying to pull some carbon out?
Yeah, so, the larger the biomass, it's to oversimplify it, the larger the biomass, the more carbon you can sequestrate. So trees obviously sequestrate in a terrestrial sense, can sequestrate quite a lot of carbon.
Right.
Grasses, not so much. But,
right.
That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be planting grasses, because there's many different types of wildlife that use grasses, not just for foraging, but for, hiding in and hunting right. and so forth. So we need to be mindful of what existed prior, but also the best way to, we don't like necessarily the word to rehabilitate, but restore degraded lands, bring them back into restoration. So we've got so much land that's degraded, and it's degraded for many reasons. One reason would be, agriculture right. and excessive use of things like synthetic fertilizers, which have depleted our soils. Mm-hmm. And once they're over farmed, they if they're left abandoned, they will just become very, very degraded and increase in salinity and so and lots of other things. Right. And we've noticed in waterways here in Australia, our rivers that have this degraded land that borders our rivers, they're slowly eroding, and we're actually creating gorges into the side of the land, and right. that's causing soil erosion, which is then going into the waterways, which is then going into the oceans, which is then being one of the causes of reef dieback. Because it's taking all its toxins with them into the ocean. So one way we can address that problem is by adding different types of grasses, different types of local, fauna, bushes, flowers, whatnot, as a way of adding structure back to a topsoil, so then it can right. start absorbing water right. And start regenerating itself. So that's one way, not just going out and planting trees, but we are helping restore a degraded land, yep. but also, as a consequence, we're reducing the amount of soil that's been eroded and then going into the oceans, which is causing reef dieback. So there's many different levels of impact and how we right. can play a part. And it's right. understanding that level and understanding what we can do and where we should actually get involved. And another way is, there's here in Australia, bushfires. There's lots of talk of bushfires, and rightly so. We are seeing the bushfire season is increasing and has been increasing year on year. Mm-hmm. The intensity of the fires that we're seeing is increasing. And that is having a huge impact on biodiversity. So, not just wildlife, but as I said before, habitats and food sources for animals just aren't there anymore. And there's certain species that will only reseed and repopulate once they get to a certain maturity. And unfortunately, because of the frequencies of these fires, those species aren't getting to that maturity. So right. we're not reseeding. So there becomes a point in time where we have to ask ourselves, Mother Nature's done a great job replenishing what she needs up to date. But now we're in a sort of a quasi sort of crossroads where, climate change is a man-made disaster. Right. We are responsible for emitting carbon and greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, which is heating the earth. Mm. So that's causing these larger fire seasons. This is causing the higher frequency, higher intensity of fires, which is causing permanent loss of our bushland and our forests. So right. do we stand idle, on the sidelines and say, okay, well, Mother Nature looks after this herself and we shouldn't get involved? Because in my eyes, that's just being a bystander to climate change. It's right. We need to be proactive and find ways that we can help mitigate it. And it's not just climate change; it's biodiversity loss.
No, it's a more broader environmental umbrella of which climate change is kind of an input, I guess. But is there Australia especially is, I guess, sensitive to another cane toad problem, right? Where you introduce a problem rather than creating a solution. I want to understand a little bit about kind of some of the considerations that go into some of the decision making. And so this is like we're going to get onto drones. We'll get to that later. That's kind of the visible, sexy bit, I reckon. But the bit that I'm really kind of curious about is how do you understand something in a system well enough to understand what to do in a particular part of the system, or even a downstream system like the reef that's at the end of the river?
Yeah. So very complex question. Very complex answer.
Good. We've got a little bit of time. So that's good.
And, in the long and short of it, some things we don't understand. There's because it's very hard if we did not have any documented evidence of what existed prior in many of these areas, then we have to make an educated guess. It certainly isn't a guess. It's an educated guess, which involves lots of different types of ecosystem modeling. So it's analyzing the areas to identify what species do exist in those areas and what their fringes is, so how far they spread out into certain areas. It's understanding if there is any data that existed before to say what species did exist, and if those species actually did still survive. Was a wildfire the cause of their dieback, or was it something different? Was it climate change? Was it higher temperatures? Longer drought periods? There's many reasons for ecosystem change. So what we have to understand is using that information, what we believe would be the best way to start reestablishing that fauna in that area, and being mindful of which animals we know exist in those areas, and so on.
And just a question on that: how do you, are you looking at Google Earth photos from 20 years ago to work out? I don't know if it was around 20 years ago, but are you looking at old photography to work out what was that? How do you work that out?
So this is something that we're working to in parallel. So obviously local knowledge is prime in these kind of in this regard. So if you're working in Barrenshire as opposed to working down in the Monaro or working somewhere else in Australia, the ecosystems are very different. Having that local knowledge of people that know which species existed or do exist in those areas is probably the best first point of call. And then obviously analysing different types of journals and papers and research. And it does exist. We can access different types of databases, whether it be the Royal Botanic Gardens and different sources for determining what species are native in what areas. But then it's understanding, if those species did exist, were they dying back prior to an actual disaster? If they were, why were they dying back? Was it longer spells of drought? Was it degraded soils? There's many reasons why, and we have to understand that problem. Once we've understood those things, then we can then maybe select a number of different species, whether they come from the same family of species, to determine which ones will be most likely to thrive and offer the same benefits for those ecosystems in 50 years and 100 years time, because there's no point going back and planting exactly the same things if those species were in dieback, and the dieback was caused to higher temperatures. So there is an element of not understanding, because we don't, and using satellite images is great, but then species identification from aerial photography at the moment is very, very difficult, and that's something that we're working quite heavily on. It's building out our AI to identify shapes and different colour spectrums of certain types of species at certain stages of growth, so that we have the ability then to fly, a fixed-wing drone over a large area, take high-resolution photogrammetry, process that information through an AI algorithm, and then identify what species do exist. So now we can be ahead of the game. We can be looking forward, identifying those species in those areas. If a wildfire came in 5 years' time, then we would know what existed. And know how to help rehabilitate.
Just a question on the types of people. Like, there's people obviously who understand, imagery and data science and the like. But in terms of the social or biological sciences that inform the thinking here, what are the kinds of people who need to be part of this, to be helping understand that data, even before we get to the drone doing drone stuff? Yeah, well, outside of the drone stuff, people often misinterpret AirSeed as just being a drone company, a tech company, which is far from the truth. We are definitely. It's in the logo. That might be the problem.
Yeah, well, I know, and but we definitely consider ourselves 50% science and 50% tech based. So our science, we work heavily with lots of different research partners. We have microbiologists, we have plant ecologists, ecosystem modelers, many different soil scientists, marine biologists. We have a really large team that helps develop certain types of solutions, and not necessarily develop solutions, but understand the problem. So, for example, we're working, and we have been for over 12 months now, with UTS here in Sydney. And we work with the climate cluster team, and we've been researching mangrove deforestation and mangrove dieback in certain parts of Australia. And deforestation of mangroves in far north Queensland has been quite prolific. Now, mangroves, to look at them, a lot of people don't like them. because they're on a well, it's true. I mean,
sorry, I shouldn't laugh, but why what's there to hate about a mangrove? I mean, it's not the most beautiful plant in the world, but
urbanization is one of the big causalities of deforestation, because they sit on the foreshore, they block your view to the waterway, they're great marine habitats, but they also attract mosquitoes and lots of other things. So if you're been with big development, people have just been walking and just whitewashing the whole place, which has such a negative impact on marine life. You are literally you're ripping out. Right? Yeah, well, that's what they are. They really are, and there are also barriers for soil erosion, sand erosion. Tsunami breaks. And they're amazing carbon sequestrators. More than 10 times the ability to sequestrate carbon than terrestrial plants.
Really?
So we really need to find a way to understand how we can
rebrand the mangrove.
Well, exactly, and it's rebrand it and reforest it. So, because typically, far north Queensland, it's not somewhere that you want to walk in your body and start planting mango trees. So there's lots of things there that can be pretty combative. So using drones is a perfect solution, but there's many other things that we have to take into consideration. So hydrodynamics, microbiology.
What's hydrodynamics, by the way?
So hydrodynamics is the flowing of water and tidal flow in and out. Things that can have an influence on a static mangrove seed in the ground could be washed away. Yeah, exactly. How much, where sand is eroded to and so on.
Got it.
So understanding lots of foundational points on hydrodynamics, but also on biology. And we've been digging into this quite in depth for the last 12 months. There's not much that exists on mangrove biology. I mean, there's very little. And so our first point of call is not necessarily going out there and planting mangroves, but it's understanding what's the best process to do that. So to do that, we have to understand the biology behind it, and we have to understand
how to plant a mangrove, or where to plant them, or why they get planted.
What kind of things will a mangrove need to sustain, early stage growth? Taking away all impacts of hydrodynamics and other things, but minerals, nutrients, what kind of things do they need, and how is that brought to their root systems? And there's many different things that we need to understand. So we work heavily on the foundation, first of all, to understand those points. And then that leads into, so we need to then deliver these things to this seed. How does that look in regards to like a seed pod, which is the capsules that we use to deliver the seeds to the ground? And then that will lead into there has to be this size and contain these things. That will then roll into the mechanics of, so then how do we deliver that shape, that pod, with those seeds in to the ground? So that leads into the delivery systems, and then that leads into the type of drone and so on. So you start with the science, and then you finalize with the tech.
Yeah, I want to just drill into that a little bit, because I think part that is kind of cool, and we spoke about this before we jumped on, is the bit where you've worked out what to get that thing seeded, planted and seeded, I guess. There's a certain kind of kickstart that needs to happen around the ideal conditions for that thing to suddenly come out and go, oh yeah, everything's here that I was looking for.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a head start. And so what just describe that part of the solution. It's like a pod that has a bunch of nutrients in it that's like a liquid or something. What is that?
Yeah, so I'll give you the high level simple response. It's quite sciencey, but yeah, basically it's a seed pod, which is it's a small organic capsule which holds lots of different types of minerals and nutrients and a very specific probiotic. And the probiotic is created from what we've analyzed is missing in degraded soils. And there's a long process that goes into it, and it's a big part of our IP.
Right.
But it's understanding what species use what things within the soil, because there's a very great symbiotic relationship between roots and fauna and microbial communities in soil. And it's understanding what that symbiotic transfer is, and how we can utilize that to deliver specific nutrient packs to a seed once it's germinated. And then basically the idea that in simplest form is once a seed has germinated, and that's when, obviously we've had a plantation, it rains, there's moisture, seed germinates. But once it's germinated, it's like bang, you've got everything you need to start expelling energy and growth, and not searching for the things that don't exist in the soil.
Got it.
That's the basic.
And I'm this microbial soup, let's call it, that exists inside the pod. How do you like, how do you, I'm trying to work out how you create it. Like, is it kind of, we've got a bucket of things here and here's a little spoon of this and it's an alchemist with a, pot or something. How does it, like, you don't have to go into the detail too much.
That's the IP. Yeah. I can't really tell you that. But it's,
no, that's fine.
But yeah, it's complex. Yeah. And we've simplified it and we continue to simplify, obviously because simpler is better at scale. You don't want a very complex model. So we're working on that at the moment. And the real issue is, you can imagine there's so many different types of micro ecosystems inside of an ecosystem, which is very isolated to a certain point in Australia. Yep. And within that, there's so many different types of soils, and you've got so many different types of species. You've got thousands and thousands of different types of, varieties of eucalyptus, never mind just grasses and bushland and other types of species. So it's that data at the moment doesn't exist. So we're building that as we go. Yep. So the real problem in front of us is continuing to build that database and understanding how those probiotics play in different established.
And then you've got a closed loop here, because once you plant it, then you can keep flying the drone over to, or in other ways, obviously, to assess how well that thing is performing in that environment. And
and that's exactly that's where the drones really come into play. It's we have like a 4-step process.
Sure.
Step 1 would be the analysing of the land and the ecosystem modelling, understanding the soil, understanding the species we should be planting.
Yep.
And then you've got the manufacturing of the seed pods, which is step 2, which is all done in a mobile manufacturing plant, because we want to be manufacturing seed pods very close to, if not in the actual planting location.
Why is that, by the way?
Because
why not,
it's cross-border transportation of any organic matter is extremely difficult, not just domestically but internationally. And we're trying to build a global business here. So if you want to be planting seed pods that are specifically designed for that soil type on that area, which means that you're typically using some of the soil. Yeah. So it makes a lot of sense to manufacture seed pods in situ.
So it's like is it one of those vans that the band used to tour around in the 70s that's just got a bunch of pod making stuff in the back? Like how, is that the mechanics?
Yeah, well, we're not as fashionable at the moment. We're working out of a 20-foot shipping container, which, trust me, we were in Africa last year and we were doing trials over there, and being in the back of a shipping container manufacturing pods when it's 100 and odd degrees outside and 85% humidity is not somewhere that you want to be. So we might have to rethink about how we do that in the future.
Somehow put solar panels on the roof and a bit of aircon or something to make it feasible.
Yeah, the new version has a lot of solar panels that fold out, and it has got aircon. So yeah, but the latest prototype is a lot more autonomous. It's pretty much plug and play. You just one person empties all the ingredients to one side and a certain type of species into a tray, and it makes seed pods and pushes them out. So but the first prototype was labor intensive, 4 people inside a container.
So that's the step 2. We've got step 3 and step 4. I want to make sure I didn't miss those.
So step 3 is the planting, obviously. Okay. So drones going out there and planting trees and grasses and bushes. So we have a number of different delivery systems, and the delivery systems we use is very specific to certain types of projects. Mm-hmm. So we have what we call a podder, which is the pneumatic firing of the seed pod into the ground. Yep. We have a gravity-fed system, which is dropping seed pods on top of the ground. And we have a spreader which spreads out grass seed inside of the same nutrient pack as a seed pod, but it's grasses. And that's for topsoil restructuring. But we're able to plant at the moment up to 12 different species during one flight.
Interesting.
So it's all autonomous. So the computer at the moment will, using the information from step 1, we analyze which places we should be planting certain species, and that's all dependent on different things like irrigation, terrain,
sunlight, nature of the topography.
Yeah, exactly. And so then we identify where we should be planting those species, and then the drone's then told what to do, and it takes off and it drops them in different places and fires them into different places and so forth. And then the spreading system is probably akin to an aerial tractor. It just flies across the air and just spreads out.
I think you just invented a better word for the drone. An aerial tractors has heaps more. Okay, cool. I'm in the visual zone with that.
Yeah. It's so that's step 3, but step 4 is really really important part. And we call it monitoring and proactive protection, and it's how we interact with the project once we've planted. And obviously from our aspect, we're all about getting data at the moment. We're not commercial at the moment. We won't be until for another early 2022. And we're really working on just refining the solution for scalability in 2022 at the moment. So building out as much data as we can to help us drive that solution is important. So going back on a regular basis, flying, taking those high resolution photograph images and processing them to be able to understand the different complexities of shapes and colour specimens for different species, to identify them in the future, understanding what's worked, what hasn't, and then trying to find boots on ground. Why hasn't it worked?
Is there a role actually? Sorry, just where you go in and go, oh, that shouldn't be there, and you somehow tend to it, or is it like we got to let the system do the system and let's improve the thing we deliver into the ground? We don't want to fuck with nature, so to speak, in that zone?
No, I mean, there's an element of that. So going into any area, there's certain types of species that we already know are invasive to the area.
Right.
And we will address those at either at step 1 or at step 4.
Okay.
And
with the drones, or
with the drones. So everything's done by drones. So we have
battle drone.
So it's a what we call a spot spraying drone. So it carries 10 liters of herbicide, and the benefit of using this type of system is literally we fly on top of let's say it's an invasive weed, and we literally blast it with some herbicide, and then so the benefits of that is really you're adding very low toxicity to the soil. You're not blanket spraying like you would be with a helicopter or an aircraft. The risk of those toxins entering the waterways is very slim. Way small. Well, sorry, I shouldn't say slim. So drastically reduced. So we're able to eradicate those invasive species by spot spraying, and we can identify them by, first of all, flying the drones, taking that photo, those high-res photos, processing them, and saying, okay, we now know that these points on our computer are invasive species. And obviously, during that build-out of data, we identify them, then we go and double-check. We will walk the field and go, yes, it is.
Drone hasn't just gone rogue.
So,
I don't like this one. It's a mangrove. I've got a personal vendetta against them.
So, you've got to be very, very scientific in the way we create it. But, it's... So that's pretty much the process, is that we and if we do see something that hasn't worked, why hasn't it established? And is there signs of wildlife in the area that's been trying to take away the sea pods? I will say that the sea pods have been specifically designed to repel insects and rodents and birds and so forth. So in
the physical nature of them, or something that's in them?
As an ingredient inside of them, so they're not very tasty.
That old chestnut.
That old chestnut, yeah. So everything's up to date. It's been a learning curve. We've been, every time we do something, we're like, oh shit, that didn't work. So why didn't that work? That's the reason.
It's a bit of it where you've got some, some animals in the ecosystem that are taste testers for these things, and just got some visual of them like, oh, terrible. Oh, good. That's what we're looking for. Great.
Yeah.
How on earth you worked out what tastes terrible to a bilby or something? That's a whole nother story.
That one, it sounds crazy, but that was, that's part of the evolution of the solution that we've been developing. And when we started out, it was, what problem are we trying to solve? And we could be both myself and my co-founder, we're both passionate about the environment.
Sure.
And
clearly.
So the task that we set ourselves is, how do we tackle reforestation or revegetation at scale? And using drones obviously was one of our solutions, the tech solution. But then, what are we competing with? What exists already in that space, in that restoration space, and how do they do that? And you've got the manual, you've got the nursery growing, cultivating seedlings, and then you have the people walking around digging holes and planting seedlings. Very slow, high cost, but great. You get high survivability. So that's always going to play a part. And then you've got the other side of the spectrum where you've got helicopters and aircraft, and we do this here in Australia as part of our post-bushfire rehabilitation plan. And we fly these aircraft or these helicopters, and we throw out seeds. Copious amounts of seeds
Right, just indiscriminately
just throwing them out. And then, so one, we burned through a high volume of seed stock, which after the last season's wildfire, we don't have a vast supply of seed stock. But you typically end up with single-digit survivability because you've got so many competitive elements. You've got animals. We're talking before about the animals eating them, saying it's tasty. Well, raw seed is tasty. Insects, ants, rodents, birds, they all eat them.
Right.
But then you've got the environmental effects as well. You've got wind, you've got rain, you've got erosion. So you lose a large percentage of your seed stock even before you get to the point of germination and then an establishment. So our goal was developing the tech to increase that throughput, but also how do we mitigate those combative elements, and the seed pod is the thing that competes against them. So
the part of that solution. I want to talk a little bit. I want to get out of the biology and out of the tech, and talk a little bit about scale and economics, because I think you're ultimately there's a couple of things here. You've talked about how we're not seeing this get economical until 2022 or whatever that is. And then there's a thing on your site that talks about having, planting 100 million of these by 2024, but these being the trees as obviously a shorthand for whatever it is you're planting. But then I'm like, I did a little bit of kind of background, and the number that I heard that sort of is the kind of reforestation number, if you like, is kind of closer to $1 trillion. So 100 million is a big number, but $1 trillion means kind of 1,000 times that effort. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering how you see the economics working, and how you see this thing being the whole problem being able to solve at scale. Is it AirSeed doing everything? Like, let's talk about that for a bit.
Yeah. And it's, so you're right. I mean, by 2050, the goal is to be planting 1 trillion trees, not AirSeed, but globally, we need to plant 1 trillion trees. So it's basically, 900 million hectares of land for restoration, 0.9 billion hectares of land for restoration.
Right.
But 0.9 billion hectares of land for restoration. So, that's a massive undertaking. So our goal, you're right, 100 million trees, which we're being realistic in what we believe we can achieve by that point in time. But obviously, post those dates, we will scale exponentially higher. Looking at the economics, I mean, if you're looking at one of the biggest deterrents for degraded land restoration or any sort of restoration project or environmental established project is cost and it's time. So if you can, let me give you an example. I'll give you a few examples. So first of all, bushfire here in Australia, bushfires, they were finished by March.
Right.
We had the ability to typically using manual hand planting, you'd have to get the seed stock, put it into the nursery, grow those seedlings, and then plant them at specific point in time, depending on where you're planting them. Okay, because every area has a specific type of planting season.
Sure.
So the issue is we didn't have enough time to grow those seedlings to get them into the ground.
Right.
This season, so we've actually lost a whole year of time before we can actually go out there and start establishing. And even now we're at a point where the devastation is so large that we don't have enough nurseries to cultivate seedlings to be able to make an impact. Right. So if you look at a different solution, which is, going out there and planting seeds in a seed pod using drones or using whatever, we can be a rapid response to those effects. Mm-hmm. So within 6 weeks, we can be out there and start planting. So that the economics of the fact that you can start remediating a problem or that's come from wildfires and so on within a 6 week period post fire, as opposed to waiting an entire year and then be able to tackle a small amount of that is one way. But also then the economics of the financial economics of tackling a project. So drones we believe is going to play a part. It's not going to be the entire solution. There's always going to be a place for seedlings. There's always going to be a place for different methodologies. But if you're looking at a speed to market and cost point, we're typically 25 times faster in the rate that we can plant compared to digging a hole and planting a seedling. Right. We can obviously plant at much higher scale because we're planting seed and not having to cultivate them in a nursery. Right. But on the cost point, we're 80% cheaper because of the viability of planting a seed and reducing that logistical chain is quite considerable.
And I guess the thing I'm trying to understand is there's clearly a cost associated with the delivery of the outcome regardless. But how do you see, like, what's happening is the Australian government, in the case of the bushfires in Australia, saying, hey, we need to do this thing. We're going to have to send someone out to do it. So we found a way to do it at 80% less cost. I mean, how does the economics work in terms of who's paying the bill? Like, I guess that's the thing I'm trying to understand.
Yeah. So, there's a few strings to who's paying the bill when it comes down to it. And I'll alleviate into one in a minute. But just touching on government, obviously, this is a pioneer industry, so we're still paving the way through different types of trials and validating different types of successes with different types of species and different types of soils and different types of environments. So no government's going to turn around and go, okay, there you go, please go in, restore all of these lands.
Mangroves.
Exactly. So, but we're getting now. There's a realization that we've all signed up for this. Things like the Paris Accord, the Paris Agreement. We're entering into next year's entering into the decade of restoration with the UN, and we have these goals to mitigate global warming whilst also increasing biodiversity, and we realise that we simply can't have an impact doing it the way we used to do before. So we have to look at adopting different types of innovation, on which AirSeed will play a part.
Right.
But there'll be also other strings to that bow. But on talks of who's paying for it, I mean, if you look at NETs, so negative emission technologies, and how they're developing over the course of the next 25, 30 years, there's obviously you have NBS, which is natural based solutions, which is typically reforestation and planting different types of fauna, which can sequester carbon, which is a proven way of going to market now. So there's lots of different types of schemes that offer carbon offset schemes for going out there and helping restore certain lands.
Right.
Large corporates are now saying, by 2025, 2030, 2050, our goal is to be net zero. In say for Microsoft, it's negative. There's big audacious goals by large corporations recognizing the need.
Got it.
To make a difference, but also recognizing the need that there's a financial benefit to this as well, because if it's married with the carbon credit scheme, if this continues to rise as is forecast over the course of the next 30 years, it's going to be a nice financial model for people to be involved in, whilst also being sustainable. So we're seeing a huge push towards NBS, and then the other types of negative emission technologies, such as BECCS and DACs and different types of things where you.
What's that one? BECCS and DACs?
So you've got sort of bioenergy.
Okay.
So biochar and different types of things and then you've got direct air capture, which is DACs. So the big machines that can draw carbon out of the atmosphere.
Yeah, carbon.
These things, whilst bioenergy is there, there's a limitation on the scale it can go to because it needs land mass to be able to grow the vegetation, to be able to create into biochar and energy. And then there's a way off between agriculture, reforestation, and bioenergy. So there's a balancing.
Right.
And then direct air capture is technology that is very much in conceptual at the moment, and the economics of doing it at scale still are quite wild and scary. So really, the only way forward is going for natural-based solutions, which is great because it also benefits biodiversity if it's done in the right way.
Right.
So it's, by 2050, they're estimating that market itself is going to be over $800 billion a year. So it's a huge increase.
And this is driven by corporations and governments and even individuals saying, I want to be part of the solution because it's good for business, or, we have internal objectives or stakeholders or whatever that thing is. And we obviously are in the business of flying planes or building operating systems, so we're not in the business of knowing how to do this stuff.
Yeah.
And the commercial opportunity, which is kind of the catalyst for your own scale and the scale of the industry generally, is to say we can help you solve that problem, and we've fully considered that problem. It isn't simply going and creating a monoculture of pine trees.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. Yeah.
That's fascinating. I mean, I imagine a world 30 years ago where the idea that a Microsoft would say, we need to go and have an environmental project that we fund out of profit to meet this internal objective, that idea wouldn't have existed 30 years ago, and that idea is heavily relevant, clearly now. Did something change, or is that not the case?
No, I mean, we knew climate change was here in the 1970s, the 1980s, 1990s, and we had the ability to to make a difference back then. But you know what? We didn't.
Right.
And unfortunately, we're dealing with humankind, and that's one of the biggest shifts outside of what we're able to do. It's changing the cultural or society to be able to deem that we do need to make a difference on an individual and a united front. And it's.
Do you see a world where an individual can say, we had Lily Dempster on from One Small Step, and it's like a habit changing app for just changing your own behavior to emit less. But it's a subscription based model, and you'd think, well, maybe I can pay $10 a month, and she gets a bit of it, and then the rest goes to AirSeed and helps just contribute to a running program that funds that somehow. I don't know. Is there a way to engage individuals?
Yeah, I mean there is, and we are looking at different ways of doing that. And I think from what we see, probably the best way is just by partnering, and we're working with these partnerships at the moment. And we're working with a company called Pure Life Organics in Canada, they have no interest in offsetting their carbon. They're already extremely sustainable.
Right.
They just want to make a difference. So we're doing trials for them. Starting now in November, going through until next year. And they're funding the trials, which will lead into a larger based sort of retainer on an annual basis for them, where we can tackle environmental restoration projects, and they can contribute to it. And it's so we using those guys to help deliver their members or their clients to AirSeed and deliver those funds is one string of the bow. I do think there's well, it's more of a political and social.
That's fine. We can talk about whatever we want.
But we all have to do our thing. We all have to play our part.
Right.
But as everything, there needs to be. There's people that will and there's people that won't. So it's mitigating the people that won't. And we're at a point. We had the chance to do it back in the 90s, and we decided not to. And instead, we've just we've emitted more than we ever did in the last 30 years, and for the rest of the time of humanity. So it's. We knew it was here, but we continued to turn a blind eye to it, and we've just carried on regardless. And now we've got ourselves into a bit of a pickle, and we need to get ourselves out of it. But whether we, when I keep saying mitigating climate change, whether we like it or not, climate change is here. It's what we do moving from here to help
minimize the impact or wind it back.
Yeah.
I'm curious as well. Just one specific thing about with the organisational engagement. There's a bank in Victoria, I think it's Bank Australia, and they run their own. I mean, I'm sure someone runs it on their behalf, but they effectively run their own kind of carbon offset in some way, in terms of they've got a place that grows something that offsets. And I'm sure that a part of this is the physicality and the visceral nature of how close that is to their own organisation, and so they can point out there and say that bit of land, we're fixing that, and when you bank here, we can point to that. What, that group you just spoke about in Canada, I'm assuming the bit that they're engaging you to help, reforest, if that's the right word, or restore, probably the better word, that's probably near where they are physically as well. Is this generally the case, or your expectation as well as what you're going to see?
No.
No?
I think no. They obviously Canadian-based. I think the point that the main driver to coming to Australia was at the end of the last wildfire season, and how much devastation there was. Right. So they obviously came in, and they wanted to make a difference and help restore certain lands. So there's a way that we can do that. I mean, in today's modern society where everything's driven by the internet, one thing that we were working heavily on is the visual ability for somebody who has invested in some types of restoration to be able to go in through Google Maps or Google Earth over the course of the next 10 years and know where it's been, what we've planted, where it's planted.
Close the loop.
Close the loop. And it's, not only does it validate the projects, but it gives us credence knowing that we're doing the right thing. Because if you are taking money in certain ways to help restore lands, then you need to show that we are actually doing what we're doing. So we've spent a lot of time developing a very strategic data management plan with regards to how we collect data from the drones and what we plant, so we can then, not in real time, but close to have an input into a website such as Pure Life Organics, where they can see.
Here's the map, and here's how it's evolved, and here's the on-the-ground video.
This species planted in this GPS coordinate at this time. It was funded by this company, and it was, this species and so on and so on. So you can go back in 10 years and just look in Google Earth and you can see what's established. And that's important. It's
I think you need to bring that home for people. I guess I've got one just final question, just in terms of where you're up to in the business at the moment, or in the venture, or whatever the right word is. Like, what's the big lever for you at the moment with regards to, like, if we can do this, or if we can open this door or close this thing, this is going to be the thing that vaults us into the next major part of our growth?
Yeah, we're raising money. Woo! So we need more money. So we're actually underway with a capital raise at the moment. Right. We're looking for 1.7 million to grow the team over the course of the next 14, 16 months for that next stage of commercialization and scale. Yep. We're building out, and a lot of it's in the science space, bringing in some more
biologists and all those types of people.
Yeah, plant ecologists. Because we're working with research. We want to make sure the research is driven in the right way.
Right.
And then just building out the systems, the manufacturing plants, so more mechatronics engineers and software developers, and just really refining the team and building out the pipeline for 2022 to tackle the right projects. Because whilst we receive a lot of inquiries for lots of projects and lots of trials all over the world, and again through trial and error, you learn that we're very strategic now in the trials that we undertake, because we want diverse trials that yield high data for us to be able to make sure that we're developing the right solutions. So we building out the right pipeline for AirSeed to start really growing in 2022 is big on the list.
Yeah. Okay. That's amazing. Like, we'll put that through the network. That's hopefully we can help in some regard there. Andrew, I actually feel like we go for another 45 minutes here, but I'm mindful of yours, mine, and everyone else's time. But thank you, like, unbelievably for diving into a bunch of the detail today. It was really, really interesting, and I'm really excited for what you're doing.
Thanks very much, Vince. Yeah, I'm always happy to talk.
We'll do a round 2 in about 6 months.
Yeah, sounds good.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks again.
Good stuff. Talk soon.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Shape the System. As usual, if you'd like to suggest a guest, someone that you know who's helped change a system for the better, please go to www.shapethesystem.org, click on the top right-hand corner, then click Suggest Guest. Make sure that you click subscribe so that you get the new episode. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures. Connects founders to the services they need along their journey. Whether you are looking to refine your strategy, mature your finance function, prepare for a capital raise, expand abroad, or simply comply with regulatory requirements, they provide you with the support you need to drive your business forward.